Wrath Classic is finally here. Today we're going to talk about the launch experience for World of Warcraft's second expansion, as well as recap a bunch of news from recent interviews and some blue posts in the days leading up to launch. But let's begin with the launch. Unsurprisingly, queues were back for many of the larger realms, but they didn't begin to start until later than I anticipated. Every single realm that was locked in advance of release to attempt to begin to alleviate the inevitable queues have remained in that state, and seeing how things have gone so far are pretty likely to stay that way as well. On my realm, Pyrewood Village, we went up to some 12 or so layers and have hovered around that or gone a bit lower since. I also experienced a number of crashes on the first few days as well, but that seems to have cleared up though. All in all, I think the launch went rather well. Of course, my realm has nowhere near the population of the likes of Gehennas or Benediction. They all have to let me know how it went for you. I picked Howling Fjord as the zone to start in, but I didn't really get too much chance to play on launch as I had other things which I had to do at the time. I also tried to head over to the Borean Tundra to see how things were looking there, and for us the boat just completely broke, like it didn't work whatsoever, and Blizzard shortly after had to add a manual teleport to the Dockmaster NPC, and I heard about this happening on a bunch of other servers as well. Since then, despite the huge returning player base, there hasn't been too many bad bottlenecks either thanks to layering. There's not been too many cases where named mobs have loads of people waiting, though some quests do contain some very lengthy RP, which can be really annoying. That one quest in the cellar of Winterguard in Dragonblight, I'm looking at you here. I wonder if Horde does anything as bad as that. I've seen much worse from World of Warcraft launches in the past. We're not going to talk about what happened in Warlords of Draenor here. I'm going to give Blizzard a thumbs up on the re-release of Wrath Classic. Next, getting into some of the news, more on the community dubbed Heroic Plus has recently come to light in an interview hosted by Scotty J and Mr. GM with Blizzard dev Chris Zerhut. Heroic Plus was a notion Blizzard revealed some time ago because they wanted to keep dungeons relevant and interesting as the expansion progresses, and you can definitely make an argument they are already relevant, because badges alone will assure that, but they eventually become exceedingly face roll, more so than they already are at their launch state. During the interview, it was mentioned that players will have the ability to increase the difficulty on heroic dungeons. As to exactly how this is done, via a toggle outside where you choose between heroic or normal or something else, an NPC inside the dungeon, or perhaps even extra bosses, that's the bit we don't know quite yet. But what was mentioned is what the bonus rewards will be for Heroic Plus content. This will come in the form of a loot table shifting about. Beginning when Ulduar opens in Phase 2, all 25-man raid loot from Tier 7 will be moved to the 10-man raid version instead, and the 10-man raid loot will be moved to the new Heroic Plus dungeons. So just to reiterate, 25-man raid items go to 10-man, 10-man raid items go to Heroic Plus. It's as if all loot is getting moved down one notch. So yes, raid quality loot will come from these new dungeons. Old raid quality loot at least. Once Ulduar is out, the best gear in the game will still come from that source. Initial thoughts from me are, well, it does seem interesting and I think I like it, but I want to hear more about what kind of difficulty this Heroic Plus will take though. I don't expect it to be very hard, by the way, because this to me seems like catch-up content, pure and simple, not an alternative to endgame like Mythic Plus is in retail. If it was an alternative endgame, surely the rewards would reflect that, and they don't. Also, heroic dungeons are on a daily lockout, so you're going to be absolutely power gearing your ults, assuming Heroic Plus is daily, that is. How will raid items be distributed into heroics? There's no official dungeon journal, so is it just the case that players go in there, figure it out, and then we update Atlas loot? On top of that, good epics are already put in dungeons, just not quite this early. Trial of the Champion 5-man normal is 200 item level, that's like Nax 10, and heroic is 219, which is Ulduar 10. The ICC heroics drop 232 item level gear 2, which is equivalent to Ulduar 25 or Trial 10-man. Also, what happens to Heroic Plus once we are, say, in the Trial of the Crusader patch? Will they start dropping Ulduar gear and the content gets buffed? But then how about the Tier 7 10-man loot? resources that move back into raids at that point in time. How will this affect GDKP's farming old content for gold? Will people offer world tour for epics and pre-agreed prices if X item drops? Definitely a few questions to be asked here. On the surface though, it sure looks interesting. Also, wow, are dungeons ever going to be popular? This is going to make the dungeon group finder tool look really great stats wise, by the way, for Blizzard. If you were hoping they would add the LFD later on, which I suspected they just might have, now that they've announced this, I'm really not too sure anymore. And that's even without going into the question of would Heroic Plus be joinable via a random queue, which I don't think it would. You can't even join Mythic 0 on retail via the automated system to this day. Moving on, the Northrend Adventuring Supply bonus boxes from quests and completing normal dungeons as a tank or healer have been nerfed. These have been handed out at a much greater rate than what I expected just through simple questing. There's a clip of me here opening a bunch of them pre-nerf. Here's what Blizzard say about the new version. We're making changes to reduce the quantity and increase the diversity of items rewarded by these bags. There is still a chance to drop consumables, but also a chance to drop ore, leather, cloth, herbs, or gems. I was going to comment about these bags before the nerf because they definitely felt like they were pricing many consumables from alchemists out of the game. On top of that, the versions of the bags that came from heroics were actually dropping flasks as well, which really stepped over the line of something which should just be handed out at random from a rewards bag to anyone. You can still get some okay-ish items from them, and don't forget they have a very low chance to give mounts obtainable in old dungeon content, such as the Swift White Hawk Strider, the Raven Lord, and Rivender's Death Charger. Saying all of this, most of the alchemy consumables that you got were things you would use to level your skill rather than items which would be super in demand at endgame. And if you are holding on a ton of these bags to do a grand opening when you hit level 80, well, unless they've changed the ID on the bags, then that is unfortunate for you, I'm afraid. Next up, we already know that content in Naxxramas has been buffed in health and damage by some 30%, but just the other day we've also had confirmation that Sartharion, specifically variants of the encounter involving the 3 drakes, have also been buffed quite a bit. The blue post says WillE of Sartharion now increases his health by 25% with 1 drake alive, 45% with 2, and 65% with 3. Previously it was just 25. The reasons for this are pretty simple. Even during the beta, when players had some decent blue gear but not Prebis, not anywhere near it in many cases, it was already very possible to full on nuke the boss and ignore the drakes and end the encounter without really having to deal with any of the extra mechanics that the drakes are supposed to add. Blizzard wants Sartharion to have such a massive health pool that this isn't a realistic possibility. That being said, classic players are very good at optimizing the game, and nuking the boss is the most optimal way to collect loot from the encounter, so I've no doubt that some nuke strategy will make a reappearance fairly early on into the expansion. You've probably already noticed this on your UI, it's been there for a while, but a quick mention to the fact that you can queue 4 battlegrounds anywhere in the world from the PvP tab on your UI. Nice bit of quality of life, glad they got that one in for launch. But speaking about queuing remotely for content, let's touch on the LFG tool so far. Obviously, it's still early days of everyone having seen this tool and now having had a go with it, and everyone's leveling at the moment too, so it's going to be extremely active. And of course, I've seen the posts of people wanting tier 6 geared or brutal gladiators for Utgard Keep or Nexus, probably because they're chain farming the instance, not doing a quest run. This was always going to happen. What I haven't seen so far is people saying I can't find a group for the content at all. And I've made the point to use it a few times myself, and there is definitely a huge mix of players in there at the moment, from returning people, boosted characters, to people in tier 5 or tier 6 TBC gear. You know, if we had the actual correct to Wrath of the Lich King looking for dungeon, a group of 3 people would be able to vote kick you if they didn't like your gear at any point throughout the dungeon. This wasn't changed until a hotfix in 2011. Which is during Cataclysm. I'm not saying the current one is perfect, I've criticized it in the past and I still think it could be improved, as I've talked about earlier, and people can and will definitely be toxic with it. They're always going to be, it's random people on the internet, but the Wrath LFD definitely had its own set of issues that were addressed later on. I think when there's thousands of people leveling per server, it's really easy to say, look how successful and good this system is. What will happen in a few weeks' time will really stand to test how the community interacts with it. We're gonna enter this pre-bis gearing phase where people reserve items and don't invite certain armor types, and we're also gonna have the badge farming phase where people heavily lean into inviting people who are extremely overgeared because they want to absolutely power through the content and just do a world tour of heroics. I think in any event, people are gonna want to do stuff fast because gamers are much more goal oriented these days. And as per usual, whenever this conversation starts to happen again and again, which it always does, don't play World of Warcraft exclusively in the pug scene unless your schedule really only allows you to do that. Try and find a guild, even if it's just a leveling guild or a temporary guild. I've played exclusively in the pug scene in the past. Sometimes you'll get a great group of people, and sometimes you'll just find the worst people on the internet. That's kind of the mix and match you get with an MMO. And with so many people having similar goals of gearing and leveling at the moment, it shouldn't be too difficult to find a guild. That is the wrap up so far. Back to leveling for me. I hope the launch on your server went well. Let me know your thoughts on the topics that we've discussed today. And as always, thank you all so much for watching and listening in. And I'll see you all in the next one very soon.